So let's start. I guess first of all, once again, it's Alex Kalinovsky. As you know, I'm the CEO and founder of Agile Engine. What you may not know is that I started a whole bunch of startups before. That would be the picture of me and the first two co-founders of my startup when I was 17, you can tell, maybe 18 here. We were celebrating the launch, some delivery of the first project. And actually that company is the one that grew into Validio that was later purchased by Global Logic when they entered Ukraine. Wrote a book, anyway, you'll know. Okay, so as you guys know, I always like to warm people up, so kind of warm up your brains a little bit. Here's a picture here. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to look at it and decide and tell me, not, but basically, make up your mind. If you know the answer, then you raise your hand. Tell me which way is this bus heading? To your right or to your left? Left. Raise your hand one more time. Think. And if you have an answer, then there. This is an awareness test also. How well you follow instructions.
Which country?
That would be Ukraine. So that's an excellent question right there. So Ukraine or US? Okay, so if you have an answer, please raise your hand. Okay, so let me let's say okay.
It's heading left because it's morning. It's heading to the city.
Okay, I like that. So the city. So which city? This city or that city? Okay. So who else was raising your hand? Okay.
Because the door is there.
Ah, very nice. The door is on the other side. There is no door here. Somehow people must get on the bus, right? How do they get on the bus? There must be a door. So which way is it heading? To your left. Yes, to my right. So that would be the right answer. Okay, anyway, but that has nothing to do with our presentation, it's just a little bigger for you. So these are the startups that I've tried myself personally, and then some of them have done well. Some of them, we learned from, which is basically the code word for not so well. But anytime you do that, you definitely learn a lot. It's very emotional experience, and actually my success rate wasn't even that bad. As you probably know, 90% of startups, that's not me, by the way, in case you're wondering. But 90% of the startups fail, I think, within the first 5 years. It's a huge failure rate, right? And there was very little sort of course, or people start businesses all the time, some succeed, some fail, but there wasn't a good mechanism that would structure it. And so there's this guy Eric Ries, and basically people over time kind of crystallized some of the knowledge, and they put it in this book and the course called Lean Startup, which is taught today in Harvard and Stanford, and a lot of business schools will definitely cover it as a course. So you guys getting it for free from me here. And so the question is, why do startups fail, right? There's not one reason, there are many reasons, as often. And here's kind of some statistical breakdown. And if you look at them, 42% fail just because there's no market need. If you look at the reasons, most of the time these reasons, okay, so what they got? Outcompeted, poor product, poor marketing. So it usually never fails because there's a bad idea. There's a ton of good ideas. Actually, any idea can succeed. Can succeed. It's much more about execution. And by the way, also, the reason why this is valuable to you guys is because all of us deal with some uncertainty, or all of you probably have some ideas that you want to implement. Whether it is to start up your own startup, that could be one of them, but it could be as simple as I'm going to build a house, or on my project I want to kind of structure a feature. I want to respond better to customer need. So anytime, basically what we're going to talk today is going to be a thinking framework. It's a framework of taking an idea and turning it into something that actually people want. Something that has life beyond your implementation. It's very easy to implement something, right? Especially for developers. Obviously it has challenges, but really the hard part is not implementing. The hard part is getting that thing that you've implemented to be used by people and loved by people. Because if it's not, it's going to die, right? And so when looking at these reasons, typically it's not like really poor implementations. It's usually market fit or they waited too long, ran out of money. So the idea behind Lean Startup is like any idea, is that you want to get as fast as possible, and you want to kind of have knowledge or a structured way of going through these steps so that you can either very quickly succeed or fail. Failure is not a terrible thing, but you want to kind of give yourself a lot of chances in that process. Because every time, if you wait too long, you run out of money. Time is money. And so the main question is not if something should be built. Again, any idea, there's a ton of good ideas. You can take an average idea and turn it into a great business, right? But can you build a sustainable business around it? Or if, as I paraphrase it, can you get people to use your stuff, right, in more simple terms, even if you're not building a business? All right, so Lean Startup has its roots in Toyota. Toyota is a very successful car manufacturer, right? The top 2 selling cars in the US are still Toyota. Again, applicable for everyone, because everyone, you can take that entrepreneurial skills, and we use it in marketing, we use these principles, right, on our sales team, recruiting, development. For sure, you can use these methods, so definitely works for everyone. And even in the regular life, I find myself like, oh, well, in a new startup, that's how I would do something. Even vacation planning, all of these things you can do. All right, so let's jump into it. When you want to approach this idea, you want to take idea and turn it into something, typically it will start with a vision. So you want to have a very short description or a way to present it, like an elevator pitch, right? You start there, keep it vague, you don't need to be very detailed on it. But you do need to communicate it and write it down so that you can share it with other people. And so, for instance, Screenster is one of the products we built here, right? It was a typical startup. We wanted to create a tool that provides 10x UI testing automation on the cloud or self-hosted without necessity to write code. So for the vision, it could be as short as this. Maybe it could be 1 pager. Don't need to write a lot. And that would be pretty much it. So once you have the vision that you can share with other people, then the next step would be to have a strategy, right? You know where you're going, so now you need to have a strategy of how do we think we can get there. Again, at this point, you want to keep it high level. You don't want to ever overanalyze anything. In fact, throughout the steps, I think the shorter you keep everything, the more beneficial it will be, because there are less discussions, less planning, less writing, less reading. The important things that need to be covered in your strategy, and this is right out in the cool stuff, is you need to right from the start decide how you will measure progress. This is very important, right? Because what is progress is not always intuitive. You know, like lines of code, is that good progress, for example, for a startup? Probably not, because people, the end users, are not necessarily, like, they're not going to be, you may write 10,000 lines of code, but if it never went into production, the value is 0. Your progress essentially could be 0. It depends how you measure it, right? Or if it's algorithm, is it the number of algorithms you implemented, or is it how fast is it? How much faster is it than the next closest implementation? So it's key to define the measures to your progress from the beginning. It's also key to talk to the end users of your stuff. And guys, again, for developers, it definitely is applicable. It may not feel, I don't know how many of you feel that it's applicable, but it definitely is applicable. Because I've been in many projects also as developer and architect, and I've seen those projects where if we did not reach the users, or it took too long, or users didn't care about the product, it got killed in the end. And so, well, you may kind of lose your job, but it kind of, to me, it kind of sucked that whatever you put your heart and soul into, right, you're writing this beautiful code, but then nobody cares about it, and it's dead. So, one way or another, usually it's not a happy ending unless you care about the users and people actually using your stuff. And we'll talk more about how you can get there. So it is important to understand what end users want, how they're going to perceive your product, talk to them early, before any kind of development or implementation or any money is spent. The earlier you get that, the better. And in Lean Startup, you value learning over working product. So again, throughout the process, kind of like the knowledge that you're extracting as you work through it is typically valued over the specific implementation, or the amount of implementation. All right, so again, looking at Screenster, for instance, we said that as our product strategy, we'll talk to the users and potential buyers, we'll define MVP, we'll build the first version, the simple version that people can actually try using, nothing on the cloud, will use it internally. We will measure adoption by teams. That's very important. Only then we will launch the website, and we'll try to write content to attract users, and we'll build a demo server, and eventually we will actually go to the cloud. And then we're always measuring for each step. We're trying to see what are the things that we will be measuring, so that we know, are we actually achieving it and taking the emotion out of it. So lean, why is it lean startup? Well, lean because, again, the focus is for any startup or any effort you're implementing is the faster you can go through the cycle. So it's going to be iterative, but the faster you go through the cycle, the less waste you produce and the more actually value as defined by your measurements. So this is the key. The value is defined by the increase in the metrics, right? So the only way to validate some idea is to measure it and to see if the key metrics that you've established for yourself are increasing or not. If they're not increasing, is that waste or value? Guys?
Waste.
It's waste, exactly. So anything you do, if something doesn't improve that you're measuring, pretty much might as well call it waste, from lean startup perspective. So again, you can kind of like pause and think about it. When you're developing, obviously making a lot of decisions, and I knowing myself, I remember oftentimes I said, wow, we need to make sure that this is a scalable approach. It needs to scale to 1 million users or 10,000 users. Well, this is not going to work when the database gets really big. Well, again, especially for most startups, you never get there. They fail way before it gets to millions of users, right? So these are important things that to take into account. But the speed at which you actually turn something over and you show something, that is very, very important. And therefore, typically you want to start with the simplest implementation, both from the features perspective and the technical backend of it. The sooner you ship, the faster you will learn, and the less waste you will produce in the process. So behind Lean Startup, the sort of the core of it is this validated learning loop. It is iterative, it's very similar to Agile, right? And actually this stuff was before Agile development. It's really old. This is like in the 80s and 90s that they invented it. And it's interesting to see how software development at that time used to be waterfall, but it kind of ended up being the same thing, right? So let's look through this loop and see how it works. So first you start with a hypothesis. Again, remember, first you start with an idea. You're an idea, you have this idea which is captured by your vision. You take the idea, you want to build something. Well, what do you build? Typically, like any scientific experiment, you make a hypothesis. You're saying, well, if we build a website where people can invite their friends and get $100 for referral, they will sign up. So you make some sort of hypothesis. And you establish the metrics that you're going to track. For example, how many, if we write this article, people will want to read it and they'll discover it on Google. So you can measure how many people are actually finding your content, or if it's a landing page, how many people are actually clicking on that sign up button. You do that from the start, and you establish yourself in metrics. And the hypothesis could be value, meaning that users want to use my product because they find that it saves them money, right? Or it could be growth. If we do this, instead of having 100 users sign up a day, we're going to have 500. So something, again, you take some metric and you hypothesize that it will improve. And along with hypothesis, you indicate which of the measurements should go up. After that, you conduct an experiment. Yeah, pretty much standard scientific stuff. Experiment is you take that hypothesis and you implement it essentially, and you see, was it right or not? Did your metrics improve? Now, within startup, it's perfectly fine to fail. And that is something that, actually with any startup, right, especially, like it normalizes a startup or any entrepreneurship, it normalizes failure. We're all kind of afraid of failing. Oh, would it work or would it not work? And how am I going to look in front of people? I spent all this time and that still doesn't work. You know, that does happen, it will happen. That's why there's a 90% of kind of, you know what you're dealing with. Any new idea is very hard to make it stick. But it is perfectly fine to try. And that's the difference kind of between entrepreneurs and sort of the regular people, is that they're not afraid to try and fail, and it's okay. Right? So we all should kind of, even within ourselves, I think, we should encourage ourselves to go and try something new. It's okay if it doesn't work. At least you've tried. One of my favorite quotes was Wayne Gretzky. You know, he's one of the best hockey players. So his quote is, "You only miss 100% of the shots you never take." Does that make sense? I think that's the note I wrote to my wife when I met her. I wanted to get her number, so I gave her the note. She gave me the number on that. I said, "Hey, what do you have to lose? You only lose 100% of the shots you don't take." She said, "Here's the number." Okay, worked for me. So, but yeah, if you cannot fail, you cannot learn. You start with hypothesis, and then you test the hypothesis by building it, running it, and seeing what happens. So when you're ready to build, so here's another thing is, okay, you need to build something. So what do you build? This is another very, very interesting, it may seem simple, but it's not so simple at all. And you need to choose, every time you're choosing, well, what should we build to test that hypothesis? Or here are the customer requirements, what do I need to build, right? Let's say you got some business requirements. So for example, Tesla, right? Our favorite Elon Musk, the guy, the modern day Iron Man, right? You know, Iron Man was actually kind of modeled after him for the movies. So they wanted to launch Model 3. How many of you follow electric vehicles and Tesla? Ooh, okay. Okay, it'll come, guys. So basically in 5 years, all cars are going to be electric. Well, half of the cars are going to be electric. So it'll definitely come here also. It's a big deal. Electric cars, I mean seriously, all cars in 10 years are going to be self-driving and electric. Mark my words. So it's a big deal. I read a lot of these news, and it's kind of exciting. It's transformation. It's like before the airplanes and after the airplanes. You know, it's almost that big of a change. Well, anyway, so do you know about Elon Musk? You know who?
Yeah.
So the big deal is, okay, so here's the guy, he's changing this whole automotive industry, right? Old industry, 100-year-old companies, Ford, Toyota, Mercedes, all of them, in his view, and in many people's view, are like walking dinosaurs. Because in 100 years, they haven't built a better engine. The internal combustion engine is basically as effective as it can be. And I think it loses about 85% of the energy, goes to waste. It's very ineffective, it's polluting, right? Terrible thing. But nobody has built anything better. So these guys come around, they're like, hey, we got an electric car. That's the future. Totally different, completely different, right? Well, anyway, they want to test this hypothesis that if they bring a mass market car that's electric, it will be successful. Well, how do you know? How do you know that it'll be successful? And they're out of money, they've invested all the money, they built the first car, but basically at that point, they cannot raise it from investors any more money, because most startups raise money, right? You guys understand that. They have no revenue, they have to go to investors, raise the money, and then use it to build a product, hoping that people will use the product, and then it's a success. Make sense?
Yeah.
So what do you think they do to go to investors and say, we're going to build this car? Do they like build a car? You can build a car and put it in the showrooms and see if people buy it, right? And if people buy some cars, then okay, you go to investors, raise money, or you can build a prototype. What do you think Elon Musk and his team did for Model 3 in order to raise capital and validate that people want this car? Well, let's get some ideas. What would we do if we were Elon Musk?
Put just a button on the side, yeah, I need or what I want, and so to get how many people.
Right, so that's essentially what they did. So if they went to investors, they wouldn't have, I mean, they did a little more than that. They done some specs, and they kind of internally decided that, yeah, we can do, we think we know how much the car would cost, how far it would go, but they didn't build anything at that point. Okay, all they built is a landing page, online store, okay, that shows people the model, and it showed them the specs. This was in like 2015 and 16. The price, and you could put a $1,000 deposit on that car. That is refundable. So, you know, when we build the car, and they said, we're going to build it in a year. And Elon Musk was wrong on late on every promise by like years. So he said, in a year, you're going to have this car. It has these amazing stats. Put $1,000, fully refundable, and you can have your line. It's like iPhone. You know how like iPhones was lines? I guess maybe not in Ukraine, but in the US there were lines when the new iPhone was coming out. Well, this is much bigger than iPhone. So the net result was that 518,000 people, when they saw it in the news, they wanted electric cars so much, they put $1,000. So Elon and his team collected $500 million in cash, which is enough to go buy a plant. They bought a plant with that. I mean, it had virtually nothing. bought their idea, of course, and they bought the plant. They also went to investors and said, look how much people want it. We have 500,000 people willing to wait a year for a car that nobody has seen, nobody even knows it's possible to build. So it's an example of they didn't spend years versus, again, you look at Mercedes and all these wonderful companies. I mean, they were hypothesizing, they have plans, Porsche, we're going to have an electric car in 2011. Who cares? I mean, 2021. This was 5 years ago. Who cares? We're going to have that car, and then we'll bring it to the showroom, and then you can buy it. Okay, well, these guys already got 500,000 people as customers, essentially. So, the first thing you build is MVP. It is from scratch, just idea, minimal viable product. How many of you have heard that term? Okay, yeah, so very common term today, right? That's where it comes from, minimal viable product. So it's the least amount of thing you can build to test your hypothesis. Again, hypothesis is not, can I build a car? Okay, you know, we can build a car. Hypothesis is, will people want my car, right? So just take a small hypothesis and build something. You have to be able to measure results, right? And you don't make assumptions, you actually take measurement. The key, again, I'm repeating, but people usually in their minds, they overestimate how much they need to pre-build, pre-plan at the early stage, or at every stage. Generally, you can do much, much, much less to prove something, and then you iterate. That's the whole idea. And when you're in doubt, if you two can agree on what is the simplest thing you can do, then simplify. Take the simpler one. That's enough. All right, so you probably remember that example. So we wanted to do the same screenster. We wanted to see like what would it cost us to run it on the cloud, and how many users would want the cloud version. So we could have built the cloud version, but instead we just put a button. You want to try screenster on the cloud, and for first several months we had like 3 people clicking. So we knew when prioritizing what's more important. Okay, it turned out this wasn't important at all. We thought people wanted cloud, but they actually didn't want the cloud as much at that time. Dropbox. You guys heard of Dropbox? So you know the MVP for Dropbox was a video. You probably remember. So they didn't build any product. They just created a video that shows you can drag essentially how the product will work. And based on that, they had some 40,000 people sign up for future data. Facebook. This is the first version of Facebook. So thinking of like how beautiful, how feature rich. It was very, very simple. Pretty ugly. But it took off, right? Because people wanted it. It was the right timing, etc. And you know the rest. So there are different kinds of MVPs for different kinds of ideas. Video, we just talked about concierge. This is an interesting one where you actually don't build anything. Many companies started that way. They don't build any software. They just manually, actually like our Transvoyant case, right? These guys, that's why we have solution specialists. Prime example, you guys are seeing it. So in Kiev, we had a team of how many? 10?
Yeah.
10 people. So there are some product features that are not ready. It's not worth coding them yet because it's cheaper to put a human to do that little work. But it's not transparent to the customer. The customer doesn't know it. It's okay to them, the product just works. By the way, Google Maps. You know, on Google Maps, there's like 1,000 people sitting and polishing Google Maps manually in India, wiping off wrong things or software mistakes that the satellite made. You know, blending images. Thousands of people, and we don't know it. So not everything needs to be built, basically, and coded. The key is to commit to iteration. So you start with something and you iterate. Obviously, it doesn't mean that it stays ugly or inefficient, and you do it for a period of time. Measure. So at each step, you measure your results. This is key because you want to see that your activity results in something getting better. If you can't prove or show that something's going to get better, then you really did not make an argument that is valid. It could very well be waste. Again, think about your implementations, whatever you guys are doing, coding, like, okay, if we do this, what will get better to the user or to the business executive stakeholder who is essentially paying for all our work, right? If he cannot measure or see that something is better on some chart, charts are a wonderful way to show that. Here's a chart and now there's a chart, okay? If you can't show that, you very well might have wasted money. So that's why I used to be very excited about refactoring, and now I'm a lot less excited about refactoring because factoring is hard to show business value. But there are ways to sell it, of course. Again, you just have to show what metrics will improve so that the return on investment is there. Okay, so when you measure, it needs to be actionable, accessible, auditable. So, for example, how many of you know how many users are using like the application you're working on, your very own code? Can you raise your hand? Okay, so you see, I see like 3 hands. But in theory, all of you guys should know that if you think about it, right? Because if you don't know, well, somebody should know. How many of you are collecting metrics today with the software that you're building today? Yeah, and now there you see, guys, so this is pretty depressing for us, because that means we're not even collecting. Not we, I understand you guys are not really driving this, but your business stakeholders should be driving this, and you can help them. But a lot of things you can put in yourself. Because the point is, if you're not collecting metrics and you don't know who's using your stuff, what are we building, right? Okay, so, and by the way, enterprises are adopting this stuff also big time. Because this is like, again, waterfall and agile. It's the same transformational shift, right? It's like today doing waterfall is kind of crazy, right? It's the same way. This stuff is coming. So you can do certain things yourself, again, to support your arguments. You can measure performance. You can measure how long does it take to process a request. You can measure how many errors are happening in production with your software, right? That you can do yourself. So you can collect these metrics so you at least know, like if nobody uses a certain piece of your product, then you don't need to refactor that piece. You don't need to touch it maybe, right? And you can tell your business users, okay, let's not do that. Because I know a lot of you are under pressure to deliver something. But likewise, if you measure and you see, well, see, everybody's looking at this chart, let's make this chart pretty. So you guys can support your own arguments and recommendations with this stuff. For example, in ScreenStart, we build this console where we measure registrations funnel, very typical view of looking at data, very useful. So you're looking at how many people are coming in at the top, how many of them are able to, how many are registering, so people landed on the page, how many registered, how many logged in to try the product out online, how many of them were able to create the project, how many of them recorded the test, and you can see for each metric, we see the error rate. It looks pretty bad. But we see this, and we can go and see where the drop-offs happen, where do we lose users, what do we need to improve, and what do we need to touch. And of course, errors, we always find them. Okay, so one of the great ways to measure or to know if something is better, if you have 2 versions and you're not sure which one is better, because a lot of times it's hard, right? You can make a hypothesis. I've been so many times wrong, like lots of times I realized for many different reasons. It's almost like impossible to predict, at least for me and for most people actually, to predict which one is better. You know, you think, but you kind of think from your experience, and your users may think differently. So one of the most standard and best way, and it's like the whole science behind this one thing here, is the A/B testing. So you show 2 versions, or you run 2 pieces of code, and you measure, let's say, the response rate to both of them, and then you see which one is better and why. It's a science in its own, this A/B testing, but typically that's how it's done. So you can measure 2 versions of the landing page, and if this one converts better, then you stick with A, and you keep doing it over and over and over again. Also, the interesting observation for you being a startup is the marketing of a product may be more important than new features. Again, very typical realization that you may not need any more features. What you need is to promote your product or explain it to users better. So money goes there. And then you learn. At the end of the loop, you once you've built, so from the idea, you build it on the hypothesis, you produced code, you deployed it. That's right, guys, going to prod. Actually, how many of us here are going to production? Like when you write something within a week, your code goes to production. Right, so there's another one where this one we definitely should try to get better. I understand you're all in different projects and everything, but it is kind of terrible in modern development not to go to production frequently. Okay, how many go to production once a month? Okay, well, how many go to production? How many go to production? Who here has never gone to production on your current project? Okay, well, you guys are not raising, I guess maybe it's not developer, I don't know. A few hands, somebody's hiding or not reporting or whatever, but the idea is you want to go, and seriously, like, so our CTO, we run a CTO club that in Washington, D.C. that's associated with San Francisco, New York, so a lot of CTOs from some of the best companies, Bloomberg and Pinterest, we're there and presenting them. is not matching to a typical person. So here's a startup. There's this user groups where they bring people, just regular, normal people who might be potential users. They put them in a room, they take away engineers, and they let them observe, and they ask them questions about the experience. So they played with the product, and like, okay, tell us what you think. So go ahead.
Now, Bernice, you say here that you were totally freaked out by the platform. What specifically totally freaked you out?
Everything. Just every single thing about it. Just like how it worked.
Now, who else found themselves totally freaked out by this platform? Barry, Warren, Natalie, Martina, Gwen, Amy, Walker, and Clay. You were all totally freaked out. Was anyone not totally freaked out? Clark? Good. What was your reaction?
It just made me feel stupid. This 5.6 thing is confusing. When I put videos into my main folder, it says it uploaded them, but then I didn't see where they went. It said stuff was on my phone and my iPad, but when I looked at the memory, it said 0K used. So stuff wasn't on there.
That's the platform. He's describing the platform and what's great about it. Well, clearly he doesn't get it. Clearly none of these people get it. Maybe this is a bad group.
This is the 5th one today, and it's the least hostile reaction we've seen.
Okay, well, everyone that I showed the beta to loved it. Loved.
Oh, shit.
What?
Who did you give the beta to? Your friends? Engineers?
Well, yeah, I wanted to give it to people who would understand what I'm trying to do so I could get useful feedback. And with all due respect, I gave it to you, the one person without a computing background, and you said it felt engineered. Oh, shit.
Yeah, you're trying to sell the platform to regular people, but you never actually put it in the hands of regular people. Like them.
Right, so I think I don't need to comment on that, guys, but we can learn from this. There's a bunch of things we can kind of take away from this.
What do you think about this platform?
What do you guys think about this presentation? Okay. All right, I got this. Yes, and so once you've done the loop, you completed the loop, you collected your feedback, you've learned something, like these guys did, and then you iterate. That's the whole idea. That's why you don't freak out about the first. You want to make these iterations as fast as possible. You got to be strong when you get that feedback. Keep your emotions positive, but then you iterate, and you iterate either by building on top of your existing idea. You keep improving it if it improved the metrics, or you pivot. After a number of iterations, you kind of decide that okay, well, this is not going to work, but can we tweak it enough? Maybe you uncover some information in the process. For example, Groupon. You guys heard about Groupon, so you may not know that Groupon started as a political advocacy platform where people with similar political views would get together and find each other and then try to kind of lobby politicians for their cause. So they tried it and they had some adoption. People got together, but they couldn't finance it and they really couldn't build a business out of it. So at the same time, they wanted to get pizza and they said, well, it would be nice to use our platform to get a discount on the pizza. So they tried that idea without building anything. They just stood up a WordPress in like a weekend. And a bunch of people signed up, just random people, I think, and they saw that it was big, so then they pivoted and changed that platform into what is today Groupon. So they didn't get stuck, even though they had some adoption. All right, recap. So let's do it together. So it all starts with the idea, right? So what's next? What do you do with the idea? Build. Yeah, you make a hypothesis. So you can decide what to start building with. But yes, you build. When you build, we get what?
Code.
Software. We get code. What do?
Measure.
You measure. Yeah, you put it in production. You can't measure anything unless it's in production. So okay, it's not here, but you definitely need to deploy it. Put it in front of someone, and you measure. You don't just ask, "Oh, would you use it?" Yeah, I would use it. Yeah, totally. It's a great idea. I failed so many times on that one. It's not even funny. But you actually measure. Oh, you would use it? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, use it. You're like, I'm busy. So you want to have something measurable. And then when you measure, you get the data. And when you get the data, what do?
Learn.
You learn from the data. Excellent. So that's your recap. You got the framework. Again, many ways you can just, in your life, lots of places I I apply it to. So there's a couple more slides I'll just do on how could we use this perhaps in development. So some of the ideas. Talk about the future in the future. How many of us are guilty of that? How many of you, again, hypothesize of what should it be, this framework? Or is this going to scale when we have that many users? None of you guys, you're awesome. Okay, well, I did that. So try to focus more on the task at hand and worry less about what will it be in 6 to 12 months. You need to be aligned with the vision, but not the details of the future. Start with the simplest solution that you need just today. Reduce the number of frameworks. Frameworks are wonderful, but every framework leads to debates what's a better framework, and then people have to learn it. So if you can, for something simple, if you can basically minimize the number of third-party components you bring in, that's generally better. Focus on business value, not latest tech buzz. So at the end of the day, again, people will perceive software with what they see or what they see on charts. Either they see UI or they see charts of your backend. That's kind of also an interesting thing, right? But the backend is pretty hard to show value. So do show those charts, do show reporting, and focus on delivering the business value. Collect usage and error metrics. We just saw that, right? That's something you can do. It's definitely helpful. And then automate, but only when ROI is right. So sometimes we tend to automate even things that don't necessarily, like it may take a week to automate a test case, and you only run it once every 3 months, so don't bother with it. And then for team build out, also some interesting ideas. People have different strengths and weaknesses. So recognize what's waste and what is value. So if people are producing value, then they're adding to the team, right? It may not be perfect. Nobody is perfect. You just find strengths around people, find how to use each person's strength. Keep hiring, so it's a validated learning loop. You don't know, it's hard to predict from an interview if a person's going to be great or not so great. You have some assumptions, but you need that validated learning. So give people a chance, establish metrics, how you will determine who is good and not so good, and then take emotion out and kind of see these metrics are living up to the metrics. And basically respect each other. It's not, but you know, even if things don't work out, remember that we leave a trace on every person we interact with. Right? So even if things did not work out, you want them to remember you as a nice person, and usually people do try their best, right? Those probably wouldn't even get to you, into your teams. So if they tried their best and it wasn't good enough, you know, let them keep their dignity and be nice to people so that you don't kind of ruin them. So just leave positive traces with people. All right, so with that, I'm pretty much finished on the slides, and do you guys have any questions or any ideas you want to contribute? Anything?
Just mail me. Yeah.
What's that?
Just mail me.
Mail you. Mail you?
Mail me.
You want to get the slides? Yeah. Is that what you meant?
No, I mean